This is Blackjacked, a podcast about how the civil rights movement went left.
Oh man, I gotta get up. I gotta go. Ooh. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go.
This week, again, as always, we're looking at where the civil rights movement went left. And today's episode, where it went left, is one of the biggest opportunities ever missed by Black people. And this huge missed opportunity didn't come from an act of terror or anything like that. It came from a beef. It came from a beef between Dr. King and another person who was, just like Dr. King, a Black man and a Baptist preacher. Dr. King had all the beef with a guy named Reverend Joseph H. Jackson. Reverend Joseph Jackson was the pastor of Olivet Baptist Church in Chicago, but more importantly, he was the president of the National Baptist Convention. Now, that may not mean anything to you, but trust me, that's a big deal, and I'll explain that in a second. The beef that these guys had was so crazy. By the time King goes to Chicago in 1966, he wants to do this movement in Chicago to get rid of slum housing, right? Deal with poverty, different things like that. Reverend Jackson is actually out front opposing King. Jackson is actually working with Chicago's mayor, Richard J. Daley, to oppose King, to defeat King, and tell him to get back down south. Jackson actually forbids all of the Baptist ministers. He forbids them working with King. He says, do not work with him. He forbids them from going to any of King's rallies, like nothing. With friends like this, whom he's enemies. I mean, they had beef. Now, if you think that's crazy, when King dies, 1968, right, April 4th, 1968, Jackson's church in Chicago is located on a street called South Parkway. So somebody has a bright idea. Let's rename the street to, MLK Drive. And in fact, it was renamed to King Drive. Jackson hated King so much that he changed the address of his church. He changed the address to be on the cross street so that his church address would not read Martin Luther King Drive. That's how much he hated this man. Like, that's how big the beef was. But I'm telling you, it was the biggest missed opportunity on the planet. You got to understand, we think Dr. King is a big deal. Of course, he has a national holiday. He's the man. But if you go back to the 1950s, that's not what it was. Jackson was the man. He's the president of the National Baptist Convention. Again, that may not mean anything to you, but E. Franklin Frazier, who's a very well-known sociologist back in the day, Frazier said that being the president of the National Baptist Convention is like being the Black president of the United States. The National Baptist Convention was the largest Black religious organization in the world. It had 5 or 6 million people in it. Haley Branch, who's a historian, he calls Jackson the Negro Pope. That's huge. That's a big deal. You command the largest religious organization in the world for Black people. Jackson was the man. So you got to get in your head, we're thinking from 2024, King's the man. No. Jackson was the man. He was elected president of the National Baptist Convention in 1953. He's the dude. But you got to remember, the Montgomery bus boycott pops off a couple years after. And King is becoming sort of a national figure. He's on the cover of Time magazine. Okay. And by that time, people are urging King, like, yo, you should run for president. And King said, no, I'm cool on that. Now, take a step back. When King is doing the Montgomery bus boycott, Jackson actually goes down there to speak, to support the movement. Jackson also sends 2 checks for $1,000 each. One of them was from the National Baptist Convention, and one was from his congregation to support the Montgomery movement. Daddy King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s father, says that Jackson even offered to pay for a bus to help the boycott. Incidentally, Daddy King also helped Jackson get elected president a few years before the boycott, like I said, in 1953. Jackson was friends with King's family. He had been to their home. Like, Dr. King admired him as a little boy growing up. Like, he's the guy. Okay? He's the guy. But when King starts blowing up, King's on the cover of magazines, and people are whispering like, yo, King, he should be the president. That's when things kind of start turning for Jackson. The other part about it is this. Not only is King blowing up, but Jackson feels some kind of way because King blew up using his style. I interviewed Reverend Timothy Fleming in Atlanta. In 1996, he was appointed as the director of the media ministry of the National Baptist Convention. So he has all this really rare archival footage of Reverend Jackson and other folks. I interviewed him for like over an hour at his church, and he told me, like, King stole Jackson's style, like even his speaking style, his public speaking. And he played me some tapes, and I was like, oh, No, for real, King stole his style. So Jackson is looking at this young cat, stole my style, trying to come from my spot. Actually, I'm not feeling you. And the beef kind of starts. Now, people who are apologists for Jackson, they will say, well, no, it wasn't all just that. It wasn't just jealousy. They had real philosophical differences. Jackson was just a really conservative guy. He was a Republican. He believed that we should, obey the laws and use the courts to address the grievances. He wasn't with the direct action, nonviolent stuff. He just thought that was a lot. People going to jail. It just brings violence. He just wasn't with it. Yeah, but you were with it in Montgomery, so what changed, right? I mean, it's just, okay, got it. So this thing is going on. There's this beef. It starts to really pick up steam because the National Baptist Convention, the constitution of the organization said, look, if you become president, you're supposed to only have 4 terms. Jackson's is like, I hear you, but like, I'm the guy. And he just keeps going. Year after year, he just keeps being the president. And people are like, yo, my man, I thought it was supposed to be 4 terms. Well, some preachers, people like Gardner C. Taylor, people like Martin Luther King Jr. are like, yo, my man, you should probably chill out. They actually take Jackson to court a couple of times. And each time the judge sides with Jackson. So they cannot get him out the paint. It goes real left in 1960. They have a convention, National Baptist Convention. They have their annual convention. And they say, okay, we got to get a new president. At the end of the convention, Jackson's like, I'm the president still. Gardner C. Taylor's like, well, actually, I'm the president. So we got 2 people talking about I'm the president. Then it really goes left in 1961. They have a convention in Kansas City. It goes to a place where it gets violent. There are factions pro and against, and it gets physical. A guy gets knocked off of a stage or a balcony. It's not really clear. I kind of heard both stories. A punch thrown, like all kind of stuff. And this guy ends up dying a couple of days later. And so Jackson's like, this is what I'm talking about. Everywhere y'all go, and he mentions King's name, and King's like, I wasn't even there. And he wasn't at the 61 convention. He's like, King's like, why is my name in your mouth? But he's like, everywhere y'all go, it's violence. I'm done with y'all. Y'all can get out. So in 1961, the convention splits. So they form what's called the Progressive Baptist Convention. So King and folks like that are now they form a different organization. They break off. This is really unfortunate. So here's what happens. That was 1961. You know what else happened in 1961? King is in Albany, Georgia, doing this movement and getting his butt whooped. It's not going very well. Eventually, he just has to kind of leave town, and not a whole lot happened while he was there. He's getting his butt whooped. The other thing that happens in 1961 that I think is really interesting, Jackson finds out that there are these black farmers in Tennessee who got kicked off of their land because they tried to vote. Jackson goes down there to purchase some land on their behalf so that they'll have land. He buys the land from a white guy. The white guy is so impressed by this, he basically says, man, this is the best, the coolest thing that y'all have done since like the Tuskegee Institute over there. This is great for Negroes. This is wonderful. I'm looking at this and I'm like, hold on. We got King getting his butt whooped in Albany, but we got 5 or 6 million people sitting on the sidelines, not fully engaged with the movement. We got Jackson buying land for black people. Now, remember, toward the end of King's life, he starts with the Poor People's Campaign. One of the things that they wanted in the Poor People's Campaign, they wanted poor people to have land for economic development. Well, Jackson's like, yo, I'm years ahead of you. I'm doing it. And guess what? Maybe if King could have worked with Jackson, we could have bought a whole lot more land. King's fundraising was primarily, a lot of white liberals that he was getting money from. They wouldn't have funded that. But you know who could have funded that? 5 million black people. King, if you bring your celebrity over here, we can rock out. But Jackson, why did the farmers get kicked off the land in Tennessee? Because they tried to vote. Well, I'm working on voting rights. Why don't you work with me on that? I told you I interviewed Reverend Fleming in Atlanta. He said this to me, and it had me shook. He said, if these 2 men could have ever got together, they would have turned this whole country upside down. And I believe that's true. But you have a situation where people are sort of whispering. It's not too much different than like Malcolm X or Elijah Muhammad. People are whispering like, yo, I think Malcolm's trying to take your spot. Same kind of thing is happening over here. If you're at all biblically literate, there's a story between David and Saul. So you remember like David and Goliath. David grows up and he's working under King Saul. Saul's the king of Israel. And Saul liked David at first. But then David starts to get popular. And then all of a sudden you have women out here saying, Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his tens of thousands. And Saul's like, whoa, hold on, man. Once the women started hyping up David, it became, and then Saul tries to kill David. And I think something similar is happening here between King and Jackson. Jackson sees this young cat coming and thinks he's coming for my spot. King never wanted to be president of the National Baptist Convention. And in fact, Daddy King writes Jackson at one point before he kicked King out of the convention to say, look, ML, King's family and his friends called him ML. ML's not coming for you, man. Jackson didn't want to hear all that. He didn't want to work with him. But God, if they could have ever gotten together and 5 or 6 million black people could have been mobilized. And if King could have brought his celebrity to some things that Jackson was doing, could have turned this entire country upside down. But it didn't because of ego. Again, Timothy Fleming, I really thank him for his time, for really, putting me on. But his thing is, no matter what King did, Jackson was never going to work with him. It didn't matter. And maybe that's true. But I still would challenge King. I mean, I obviously can't challenge King because, obvious reasons. But I'm just wondering, Martin Luther King Jr. built an entire career going to the mat, risking it all, risking life and limb to integrate with white people who made it very clear that I want nothing to do with you and I want nothing. I mean, I don't want to be bothered, but you risked it all to still try to be with them. And I have to wonder, was there nothing you could have done to integrate with your brother, Reverend Jackson? Was this really the guy to beef with? If you were willing to risk your life to integrate with white folk, could there not have been some level of a campaign aimed at reconciling with Reverend Jackson for the greater good? And for both men, maybe you didn't rock with each other on the same stuff, but what could you work together on? What areas of cooperation could there have been? King didn't have to necessarily do all this in the name of the National Baptist Convention. He didn't do the Montgomery bus boycott in the name of the National Baptist Convention. So you didn't have to agree on everything, but what were the things that you could have worked together on? And so even in 2024, I'm looking at this and I'm like, I get that y'all don't like each other, but like this beef really cost black people dearly. And so it is today. We have leaders, whether it's politicians, pastors, entertainers, like all these so-called leaders, everybody beefing about something. And meanwhile, people are suffering. And so it's like, but what can we get together on? We're looking backwards at King and Jackson and saying, man, y'all little beef really cost us. What are our grandchildren going to be saying about our beef? Where can we work together? What could we accomplish? We may not agree on these other things, but you know what? These things here, let's get together on that and let's see what we can get. Now, next time, we're going to look at where the civil rights movement left. Specifically, we're going to look at how do we get these whack leaders who have no character, who have no business being where they're being, try not to call names. How do we get those people? And we're going to talk about this issue of submission. Like on social media, I hear a lot of times about, women submitting and all this kind of stuff. We're going to deal with that issue. Next week, civil rights.
I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta get up and leave. I gotta get up and go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. They waiting on me when I walk out the door. They counting on me to get ready to blow. Too many people saying that I'm the hero. Too many people looking up to me. Can't let them down, not an option for me. Don't even matter if you rocking with me. I touch down even if you ain't blocking for me. No BS and no negativity. Only dealing with positive energy.